Hey there, and welcome back to DIY with Christine. Today I'm going over how we painted our metal front door without removing it from its hinges. When we bought this house, the front door was in pretty bad shape. It had dents and scratches in it and was really bringing down the curb appeal of the whole property. I decided it was finally time to give this door a refresh and give it the makeover that it deserved. So without further ado, let's get into this DIY project. The first thing I had to do was fix the dents and scratches in the front door. I have another video on my channel showing how I repaired these dents in this metal front door using a Bondo dent repair kit. The link to that video is in the description below, along with a link to my blog post that outlines all of the tools and materials I used to complete this painting project. If you have old paint on your front door that is peeling or chipping, then you'll want to sand that down before you do anything else to make sure that your new coat of paint will adhere to the door properly. The next step was to remove the door handle. I didn't want to have to worry about taping off the door handle or trying not to get any paint on it, so I just found it easier to remove it. I just simply shoved a sock in it to prevent any bugs from being able to fly in while the paint was drying. After the door handle was removed, I also taped off all of the glass and the trim around the door. Oh, and there's my nosy little nugget just checking out what I'm doing. Hi, Dash. I gave the door a thorough cleaning with a microfiber rag and dish soap so that it would be prepared for paint. It's finally on to primer. I used the Rust-Oleum primer to give the door a nice smooth coat that makes everything uniform and will cover up that Bondo dent repair that I did. I used my 2-inch short brush, which I love because it takes pressure off my wrist and lasts through multiple paint projects. And I also used a fine texture foam roller to try to minimize the amount of texture on the door. I started by trimming all of the edges with my brush and then came back in later with my roller to finish the rest of the door. Each coat of paint and primer took me about an hour to complete. Then I stopped and let the primer dry and came back to it a few hours later. Before I started applying the second coat of primer, I quickly sanded the first coat to make sure everything was flush. This also lets the second coat of primer adhere a little bit better to the first. I wiped the sanding dust down and then I went to town on the second coat of primer. I found that it was easiest to go in with my paintbrush and do all of the little detail work before I came back with my roller, because the roller let me be able to smooth out any textures from my paintbrush. It was so satisfying to see that dent completely disappear on the second coat of primer. I waited to do the edge of the door so that I could shut the door while I was working on the inside. Again, I started by going over the details first with my brush and then smoothing out all of the texture with my fine finished foam roller. Since I decided to leave the door on its hinges, I had to deal with the bugs that kept trying to fly in. I could have tarped off the area so that the bugs would stay out of getting into the family room, but instead I just pointed a large box fan at the door and put the setting on high. Bugs have a really hard time flying against really strong winds, and so that did a pretty good job of keeping the bugs out while I had to leave the door open. Once the second coat of primer was dry, I was able to shut the door and start the process over the next day with the actual front door paint. This time I started the process on the inside. I used the Rust-Oleum Front Door Paint because it works really well on metal front doors, and it went on really thick, so I only needed to use 2 coats of this. I chose black because I really love the look of a bold black door, and it matched the gray and white exterior on the inside and the outside of our house. For this step, my husband Adam helped me, and that made this process go twice as fast. I was able to use the paintbrush and go over all the details just like I did in the primer, while he was following along behind me with the foam roller. I wish I would have had him help me on the primer step too, because this would have gone a lot faster. Look how satisfying this black paint looks against this white front door. I just love watching this. Again, I used the box fan from keeping the bugs from coming into the house. After the first coat of paint was able to dry, I came back with sandpaper to give the entire door one light scuffing to remove any of the texture left behind from the foam roller. The fine finish does a pretty good job of keeping the texture minimal, but you'll still get a little bit of texture left behind, especially if you are using a high gloss paint like what the Rust-Oleum Front Door Paint is. So this light scuffing over the entire door helps to smooth all that out before you add a second coat of paint. All this sanding was definitely an arm workout, and I was covered with dust at the end of this. I made sure to wipe the door fully with a clean wet rag before I started applying my second coat of paint. Now the door might look a little bit weird between the first and second coats of paint because the texture will be a little bit splotchy, but once we get the second coat of paint on, the texture will smooth out and the door will look really good. So we started the painting process for the fourth and final time, with me going over all of the trim work and Adam following behind me with the foam roller again. After we were finished painting, we let the door dry for a few hours before we removed the sock and installed a new door handle. Here's what that area with the giant dent looked like after I repaired it and applied a coat of paint. And now for the grand reveal. Here's what this front door looked like before the dent was fixed. And here's what it looks like after we painted it. I love the look of the black door against that dark gray siding. That's all for now. Happy DIYing!